Hello, everybody. This is Cortland Allen from indiehackers.com, where I talk to the founders of profitable internet businesses and side projects to try to get a sense of how they got to where they are now. Today, I'm talking to Dave DeSandro of Metafizzy. Metafizzy is a one-man operation that Dave started really as a side project, but eventually grew into a substantial enough business that he was able to quit his full-time job at Twitter. What's interesting about Dave's story is its simplicity. He didn't set out to change the world as we know it with a revolutionary new product, but instead he's using his skills as a developer and a designer to sell basically widgets to other developers to use on their websites. Metafizzy has been incredibly successful in the past 7 years, and today Dave comes on the show to talk about what that journey has been like, and also later on in the episode, how his life has changed as a result of being able to work for himself full-time on his side project. If you are yourself a developer or a designer, an artist, or really any other type of creative who's interested in making a living by doing what you love and taking advantage of the scale provided by the internet, then I think Dave's story is a great example. So without further ado, let's jump right in. I'm here with Dave DeSandro. Dave, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you on. You're a little different than some of the people that I've had on recently who are more like traditional business founders. So they're building like these huge companies, they're hiring and managing people, they're building out sales teams. And you, on the other hand, are a lot closer to the side project end of the spectrum, but with an incredibly successful and popular and long-lasting side project, where you've really just, started using the skills you developed as a programmer and a designer to build things that you love and to make money while doing it. So I think it's really great to get a chance to talk to you and to bring someone onto the podcast who's coming at things from sort of a different angle. Before we jump in, let me ask, how would you describe what you do?
Yeah, sure. So like my basic pitch for even people that don't even work in tech is that I make widgets on websites. So I don't even make the entire website. I make something that another developer would put on their website, and I take care of all that. So they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can use one of my products. So I make things like carousels. One of the products is Flickety. I have another product called Isotope, which does sorting and filtering of lists. So kind of basic functionality that you see all across the web. That's the core business model of what I do. Those are the products.
So you're like the developer's developer, really.
I'm the man behind the man, yeah.
Yeah. So you're also kind of this rare unicorn where not only are you a developer who's capable of building tools that other developers hold in high esteem and widely make use of, but you're also a damn good designer. And I think by combining these two skills, you're really getting much more than the sum of each part. So you can build products that literally nobody else could build without having to have, a two-person team. But you can build them entirely on your own without any sort of, overhead or, communication or things that might get lost in translation. So let's go back to the point where you developed both of these skills. How did you do that?
I guess it's just like a shared interest in making stuff. When I was first kind of looking at, it all just started out as a hobby. And I was working on a blog, and I just had a photo blog, and I enjoyed working on the web design of it. And I didn't really think that I could even make a profession out of it at the time. But, I developed the interest. And at the time, this is, 2006 and 2007 or so, there was just like one title, and that was web designer. And that brought in, that was kind of like a wide funnel that brought in people with lots of different kind of talents. So I would say like John Hicks was somebody who's a web designer, but he also did icon design. And then you'd have other kind of people that were just like back end. So maybe it comes from that, like that kind of history of these kind of catch-all webmasters that have different kind of things. And so I never thought going into it that, like anybody, I just kind of pursued my interests. And so I was interested in some design stuff and some programming things. And I would say that if anything, it's like I'm a jack of two trades, like master of very few. I've also had concerns about like, am I spreading myself too thin by, not spreading myself too thin, but like, could I advance myself in a certain niche further than other people, since, I am working alone. So I'm concerned about like how to best use my time. It doesn't really make sense for me to try to be a designer, because I feel like there's way better designers out there. However, maybe I could be a better, front end developer than other people in my group.
Yeah, it can be intimidating. And I think it's because, at least one of the reasons is because, it's like any other skill. It's something that you have to learn. But for some reason with design, it just seems like people are just born with it, Like when you see a really good designer, you're like, there's just no way I could have come up with that. And yet, like, I look at what you've done and it's awesome. So how did you go from being someone who was, maybe on the outside looking in, thinking, okay, I want to become a designer, but I'm nowhere near as good as all these other people, to being someone who's actually good?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll go back to like kind of my origin story is that in college, I didn't get a degree in design or programming or anything like that. I kind of got a general Bachelor of Arts degree, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do with that. And out of college, I got a kind of office cubicle monkey job where I was like dealing with spreadsheets, and I hated it. But at the time, I had this hobby where I had this photo blog, and I loved working on the photo blog and like working on the CMS and with the design, and just kind of pinging around that. There was this kind of tight knit community of web designers, and it just seemed very exciting and very appealing. They kind of seemed like they all knew one another, and they would all meet together at South by Southwest. So I definitely felt like I was like outside looking in on this, from my cubicle. And what I did was I just kept on working on the photo blog until the point where I realized like this is who I am. Is that I'm not just somebody in an office job. I am a designer, and kind of once I made that decision for myself, that kind of changed everything. Because after that, then it's like, okay, I'm a designer. What do I need? I need to make a portfolio. I need to actually build these skills. I don't know Photoshop or Illustrator. I don't know what web designer does in an actual company. So I was able to find a certificate program that taught me the Adobe suite, and also did web design stuff, and got me in touch with a lot of people in the area who were actually working as designers, and some of those people are still my friends. And this was back in 2010 or so, and those relationships have still kind of helped me throughout my path.
Yeah, that's a great answer. A lot of people ask each other, and have asked me also, about web design. And I think a while back, 5-10 years ago, if you were a great designer, that was something that really made you stand out compared to other apps. Whereas today, it's almost like table stakes. It's so common for people to launch with just these amazing designs that it's easy to feel inadequate, especially as a developer, if you don't have any design skills. And so people are really searching for a way to develop those skills from scratch, at least to a passable level. And I think your example and how you went about it, kind of just diving in, should serve as a good example for people who are looking to do the same thing.
Yeah, I would say like the hardest part to know is like when to stop, because you can like endlessly keep tweaking. And I think like maybe it's a good thing or bad, but it's like for me, I kind of lose steam eventually working on a design where I'm like, this is good enough here. Like because I'm concerned with other things. Like once the thing I feel meets a low threshold, I'm more concerned about the other thing. And I look at kind of like what I've designed so far, and I never feel like, wow, I really put like a lot of time and effort into the web design things, because that's just, I see it as like one of many things.
Yeah, it certainly is. And, even the other angle, like coming at it from, okay, well, what is like enough time to put into it is pretty hard, because I feel like a lot of people think that, if you're a designer, you're designing something that you just get it right the first try and you just move on. And I think the iteration and the iterative nature of it is completely invisible to people. Like you probably make something and it looks like crap, at least to you when you first make it. And then you keep refining it until you hit like, a certain point where you're like, okay, I'm done with this. But all of that work that you did is completely invisible, and people only see the final product and think, well, I can't first try make something that looks that good. And so they get frustrated.
Absolutely. I like to think of George R.R. Martin, who's, probably the most popular writer right now. He's like the hottest writer that can possibly be. We're all like waiting on pins and needles for the next book to drop. I was reading he has this anthology of pretty much his entire short story career, even including the stuff where he's in high school and he's basically writing like fan fiction. And there's two fascinating parts of it. One is like, just like you said, like he starts off awful and he works his way better by better. And by like the time he's like about 25, the stories aren't that interesting, but you can see there's a hint of the writer he's going to become, where he's talking about the human condition in a very ridiculous, horror fantasy setting. And the other funny thing is that his ideas will propagate throughout his career. So he mentions in the high school he has, just like an action figure called like Khal Drago. And it's like he brought that name with him all the way until he was in his latter careers. Like, let me use this idea that I always thought was good. And he keeps recycling these ideas. And that's why, so when you read the Game of Thrones books, you're not just reading a great writer, you're kind of seeing a writer who's built up all these things over decades. And it's both impressive, but it also is humanizing, and that this person just didn't just show up one day and knock it out.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that it's analogous to kind of you and Metafizzy, because you've been working on Metafizzy now for 7 years, which is an eternity in the internet age. I mean, you've had a long time to build these libraries and to learn from what you've done in the past and improve. And even before you started Metafizzy, you released Masonry, right? So it's really been longer than 7 years. And so maybe it makes sense to start at the beginning. What is Masonry and why did you build it?
Yeah, Masonry was kind of like my first claim to fame in internet terms. Masonry is a cascading grid layout library, and you've probably seen it all over. It's like Pinterest, I guess, most popularized this kind of style. And even before Pinterest, what Masonry was around. And there were other things that did Masonry stuff at the time, but they were kind of siloed. So there was another project called Gridalicious, and there was another thing that worked with WordPress. There's also Cargo Collective. What Masonry did was a jQuery plugin, which meant that other developers could use it, and it was easier to spread. It didn't have to fit in a certain CMS. I think like a lot of my products, or a lot of things I make, it's not an original idea, but it's just maybe a little bit easier to use. And it was the right tool at the right time. This was 2010, and that's, right around when Pinterest kind of took off. And it was, having lots of images on a web page was like a whole new way to experience the web. And Masonry was kind of a big part of like the trend of these image-heavy sites at the time.
Yeah, it's like the perfect time to launch. Were you aware of that going into it, or was it just kind of a happy coincidence?
The original reason why I made it is that I had my little photo blog, and I had an idea for the way I wanted to lay out comments, because some comments are longer than others, and it didn't really matter which order they were in. So I personally just, like a lot of people, when they make things, I needed it for my own reasons, and it was just like something I wanted to use on my site. And I saw it, as a way to market myself, because at the time I may have just landed my first job, but I was trying to make a name for myself. And so that's all I kind of thought it might be useful, but it also shows like my skills. I didn't anticipate that it would be such a huge phenomenon.
Yeah, and it's really huge. I mean, it's been used on like 40,000 websites. Your GitHub repository has almost 12,000 stars. You're like 11,991. I'm going to start and see if we can get you to 12,000. Yeah, it's just incredibly successful. And a year later, 2010, you start your actual company, Metafizzy, on the side. And at this point, like you said, you've just gotten a new job. You're working full-time as a web designer at an agency, but you wrote something really interesting and your blog post about launching this side project, this company, Metafizzy. You wrote, "As Masonry is open source and free for commercial applications, it has been leveraged in a number of premium templates. This is awesome, as my work can lead to some sort of money, and if the developers of the premium templates are making money off of my resources, why not me? Clearly there's a market for developers who can use my work to turn a profit." Were you kicking yourself at this point, like a year after launching Masonry, this thing that turned into a huge phenomenon? Were you kicking yourself for not having decided to charge from the get-go?
Oh, no, because Masonry kind of did much better than I expected, or like my goal was for me to make a name for myself, and it absolutely did that. To the point where today, if I'm like at a talk or introducing myself to other developers, I can say like, I'm the guy who made Masonry, and I feel like some people would know what that is. But I mean, that's why I started my business, is that because there was a part of me that was like, man, I should be making money, right? Like when I saw other people making this stuff, I was like, well, why not me?
I think it's just so hard in general to build something that people like, especially at that scale. And so I totally can identify with like, okay, if you're going to build something that's that successful, why not also take advantage of that and also, like charge money? But your decision was to essentially start building other tools. Why didn't you, put a price tag on Masonry itself or add more to Masonry and start charging for a premium version?
I guess because I still feel this is that the general spirit of the web is that things are free and open. For the things that I work on, which is JavaScript, HTML, CSS, that's largely the case. And I didn't really want to buck that trend. And I felt that Masonry was so popular that it wasn't exactly mine, like it belonged to everybody. And the other thing is that Masonry already existed, whereas if I created a new project, I would be able to introduce it with a new set of rules and make money off of that. So it was kind of like trying to follow the spirit of front-end development and the community that I was already a part of.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think the way that your business models have worked, I really want to go into that in detail later on because it's such an interesting topic. And for people listening who aren't developers, what Dave's talking about when he says that front-end development has this culture of kind of being open and free. When you write JavaScript and people use it on their website, the code is visible to everyone. Like you don't really have any choice other than to make it basically open source, which kind of facilitates this culture that he alluded to of things being free and open. Because it's hard to make money off of something where all of the code and the functionality behind it is totally open and anyone could just take it and not pay you. But we'll get into that. So back to the beginning of Metafizzy back in 2010, you decided that you want to work on extra projects and products and try to sell them for a profit, but you don't want to charge for Masonry itself. What were your long-term goals? Were you thinking that, hey, this is something that I'm going to do on the side, or were you thinking that, hey, this is something that I want to do like full-time eventually?
Oh, at the time, it's just something I wanted to do at the side. I could never think it'd be a full-time gig, and I was happy with the work I was doing at the agency, so I wasn't thinking about it overtaking things. Before I even started, I kind of got the blessing of the two founders of the agency, Alex and Martin, who are two awesome dudes and kind of like led me to this path because they were had great entrepreneurial spirit and big advocates for being in the community and sharing what you know and putting together events that brought people together. And so I asked them for their blessing on this, and they were absolutely for it because they realized that, my success would lead to the agency's success.
So let's talk about some of the things that you've built, because following the success of Masonry probably seemed like a tough challenge at the time. What was the very first thing that you built after starting Metafizzy?
Well, I started Metafizzy around one product. It was called Isotope. And again, this was something that it wasn't my idea. There was another thing that did it at the time called Quicksand, but I thought I could do it better. And also, I built this thing around Masonry, and so I was really just building on top of Masonry. So in two regards, it wasn't a big step. It was just kind of like a 1+1+2 kind of thing. What Isotope did is that it had the Masonry layout, but it also had the ability to filter and sort items. So it could dynamically change where things were and what things were visible and what things were hidden. And, I already saw that this other thing called Quicksand got some buzz. So I knew I could kind of shimmy off of that. And I also had Masonry out there. So, I had notoriety from that, and I could also use it to point to Isotope.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who are excited to work on a project but aren't sure what to work on and have a lot of trouble coming up with an idea because they're under the misconception that whatever it is that they're working on needs to solve some totally unsolved problem, right? It needs to completely just change everything. When in reality, I end up talking to entrepreneurs like yourself, and a lot of what you're doing is looking at what came before, looking at what things are already succeeding and what problems are already solved, and saying, hey, I'm just going to go after this stuff. Then I don't have to validate the market. All I need to do is build a solution that's better than what's out there, or at least different than what's out there in some way. And I think that's really the safe bet. Were there any other examples that you learned from or that you felt inspired by?
I do feel like if anything is new about Isotope, it was like the business model, and there wasn't a lot of things for me to look at the time. But I do remember the one thing that was kind of in the same realm, where it was charging money for an open source project, was this suite of tools called Wijmo, and I think it maybe still be around, but I don't know if it's still in development. That was an inspiration. Now I'm thinking about there's other two. There was Sean Inman's Mint, which was a service that did analytics, kind of like before Google Analytics was around, as something you can put on your site for tracking like that. And so that was a commercial product that was kind of associated with the web. And there was generally things like premium WordPress themes, premium Tumblr themes. So I knew there was other kind of things that were kind of similar to it. And so even though there wasn't anything that was specifically like, a JavaScript plugin that you can charge for, I definitely looked at these other things and looked at their licensing, their commercial pages, how do they sell it on their homepage? And that gave me something to at least build off of and work as a reference point.
Okay, so you're working a full-time job. You're doing Isotope on the side. How long did it take you to get Isotope to the point where it was ready to be released? And how did you juggle that with your work responsibilities?
Well, I didn't really have a timeline, and this because it was a side project, I was able to, let myself have enough breathing room. But if I remember correctly, it probably took me about 3 to 4 months to launch it. And this is my first time kind of working on a project extended like this, even as a side project. I remember the time breakdown was something like it took me close to twice as long to build the documentation as it was to build the actual JavaScript. So like the core code maybe took like a month and a half, but the rest of the stuff took 2.5 months. Subsequently, the products I've built since then the time breakdown has been like that. Because when I get to the documentation stuff, that's actually when it's being put into actual use, and I start have to verify the features that I thought that I built. And I start catching a lot of edge cases, or I realize that something was idealized. I thought it'd be work this like really smooth way, but when I actually put it into use, I see the rough corners that need to be sanded off. And I took my time with the documentation, and that's kind of still where I feel my products can shine, because I don't see a lot of developers, or when I look at other projects, I feel like their documentation can be promote their product much better.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think in the open source community, like a lot of people don't have time to put into documentation, or they don't have that much time to put into their products to begin with, especially since they're not charging. And one of the things that's really cool about Metafizzy is how much time you put into all your documentation. It's like really a differentiating factor, because for any developer, and I think this lesson applies to other companies too, but for any developer, like your first point of contact with the project is the documentation. Like, okay, what even is this? Are there demos? What does it look like? Is it right for me? How do I use it? I'm running into this bug. How do I fix it? And if the documentation is this afterthought that, has just been kind of tacked on at the end with very little effort, then it's a significant impediment to people actually adopting and using the product. So I think it sounds like you did it right by, focusing a ton on the documentation. And really, it seems like that comes about from focusing on what things are like from your user's point of view, rather than just your point of view as a developer, which is a lot easier said than done.
At the time, I didn't really have these kind of thoughts formalized. I just kind of wanted to make something that was special. But since then, I've been thinking about this kind of point. And how I frame it is that how do I use other people's things? And typically when I'm using some other tool or something like that, it's like I don't actually care about the tool. The tool is just one of many things that I'm using to build the site. So let's say that it's like a package manager like NPM, and for whatever reason I'm working on a project with this new package manager. It's like I don't care about the package manager. I'm only using this to get to the next step. And so with that thought in mind, I've tried to make everything that it's like as quick as possible, being very kind of upfront, don't have a lot of happy text, so people can get the information they need and move on to the next thing. Like they don't need to know the philosophy or the methodology behind this sort of tool. It's just like, get me to the point where I'm using it. And then if I need to see more stuff, it's there, but those first kind of like initial onboarding steps are very important. And I think that's like something that's driven home if you're actually working on a commercial project that, people need to be onboarded in. But as like a developer, you don't really frame things in that way. If you think about like onboarding for using a tool, it's just like not part of the vocabulary.
So fast forward to today, and Metafizzy has a ton of products. You've got Isotope, you have Flickity and Packery. You just released Infinite Scroll. It's a lot of stuff. And what's striking to me about this approach is it's so different than what you see with most startups. Most startups just build one thing because it seems a lot simpler, and they just iterate on it forever and ever because they want it to be, I guess because it takes a while to get it to be good enough to compete on the market. And yet somehow you've built like 6 different things that are all good enough to sell. How did you decide on this strategy?
Yeah, so I'll just be upfront about the breakdown. Like Isotope is still the big tentpole for Metafizzy, and I'd say it's about 50 to 60% of the license sales that I make. From then, it's kind of like I already have one product, like maybe I should make another, and kind of Packery came out because that would allow me to point to something else, and hopefully one helps drive sales of the other. And that's kind of my basic marketing thinking behind building a product lineup, is that somebody might be looking for one thing and eventually they find, in the future, like, didn't that one company have the carousel widget or something like that, when they're already using a filtering sorting thing. And so that's why I build multiple things. And the other reason is that once something's built, it doesn't require as much time. Isotope took 3 to 4 months to actually build, but after that, it's still been making revenue. And so I don't actually have to be actively developing it every day in and out.
That's one of the things that I really love about your approach to Metafizzy too, because most companies build this behemoth products that have a giant to-do list of features that never get any smaller. Whereas at Metafizzy, you're just building individual features for other companies to use in their products, which means that your products that you release have a start date and an end date. Once you're done with Isotope, you might have to fix a few bugs here and there, but you're done with Isotope and you can move on to something else. And I think that's really the key to passive income. Is this approach something that you planned on taking from the beginning?
I didn't know going into it, but after Isotope was successful, I realized that was the way to go, And since then, I've had ups and downs with this kind of approach. So my second product, Packery, it's another grid layout library, but at the time, people kept on asking for this one feature, and I was like, I can't actually build it. It's tough to do with the things I have with Isotope and Masonry. So I said, you know what, let me build something that specifically does this problem, which was dragging grids of items, which is like a very kind of like complicated math problem. You have to do like bin packing and stuff like that. And I thought it was like, people kept asking for it. I was like, all right, you know what, I'm gonna make it, because I finally had the opportunity to do so. And as it turns out, it was one of these things that got a lot of questions, but it's very hard to sell it, because how many people are looking for draggable grid layout libraries? It's kind of like a very niche product. But at the time, I wasn't thinking about that. I was just thinking about like quieting the big request. And so then the next thing was like, all right, let's not do something that's so niche, and also spread the availability of what actually Metafizzy does. So the 2 first products were like very similar, and they were very similar to Masonry. And so the third product was Flickity, which was a carousel library, which is like everybody uses carousels, right? So that was something completely different, and would be different from Isotope and Packery, but I knew people were actually using it. And so Flickity has been much more successful than Packery. And so now I'm trying to like kind of broaden things, and that's why the latest thing I did was Infinite Scroll, which points back to stuff you can do with Isotope, but it's different enough from that and Flickity, so I'm hopefully making that tent bigger.
And just for context, I'd love to talk about like how successful these things have been for you, because in terms of usage, I mean, Masonry, like I mentioned earlier, is like 12,000 stars on GitHub, You made a library called Images Loaded. It's used on 70,000 websites, 6,000 stars on GitHub. Isotope is like 30,000 websites, 8,000 stars on GitHub. How much money are you making from all this stuff?
Yeah, so I'd say that Metafizzy makes six figures. It has for the past 4 years. The most successful years were 2015 and 2016, which it made $120,000 in revenue those years.
So this is like full-time programmer job. Like you don't even have to have a job. This is your full-time thing, huh?
Yeah, and so at the time, or like those years, it was making about what I made from my full-time job. The last time I worked full-time, not on Metafizzy, was 2014, and that year I made the same my salary over in Metafizzy revenue.
What made you decide to quit your job and go full-time on Metafizzy?
Yeah, well, at the time, this was 2014, and I was working for Twitter in New York City, and Metafizzy had been going for 4 years at that time, and year to year, it grew basically 200%. It doubled over year. Like the first year was like 25,000, then it was 50,000. So when I looked at that, I was like, I can be. It's legitimate money, and I wasn't transferring. I wasn't taking too big of a leap, so I didn't have to worry about. I felt that I could sustain this at least for the next year and see where things go from there. And it was just like the right time for me to leave the job. I kind of why anybody leaves job. You grow tired of something, or you don't feel like you're a full person working at that. So, it was the right time, but it wasn't too big of a risk.
Yeah, I bet it makes it a lot easier to leave your job when you're actually making hundreds of thousands of dollars from your side project. How did you juggle during this period where you were working at Twitter and also growing Metafizzy? How did you juggle the two things? 'Cause that sounds like a lot of time. Yeah,
well, I mean, to put it into context, I was married. But I didn't have a kid, or I do have a son now. But, it was just a lot of things in my life had already been taken care of. So I kind of had enough availability to work on Metafizzy on the side during those years. And it's funny, those years, like when Metafizzy was growing double, that's when I was working on it least. And so a large part of my success is really just luck. Like Isotope was the right product at the right time, and it didn't have too big of a competition, So it's flattering to talk about this like I planned it all. But I look back on this, like I just got really lucky with Isotope, and it took off on its own. I hardly did any actual marketing during those years where it was doubling over.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. And something you mentioned earlier too about Packery, how it's like, okay, it's like this draggable grid library for JavaScript. Like, how do you market that thing? How do people find it? But it seems like you did a really good job leveraging your early success and having that help the success of your later projects. For example, Masonry is this grid library. Well, Isotope's basically, like you said, built on top of Masonry, and Packery is basically a feature request. That came about from Isotope a lot. So I'm sure there's a lot of luck, but also it seems like you had a really good strategy for ensuring that the things that you were building were things that people needed, and that people who discovered you for one thing would also, become aware of similar products that you made.
Yeah, everything I kind of make is just another different version of something else that's already out there. And I remember at the time I was like, oh, I'm such a big innovator, Masonry is this whole new thing. But I've come to realize I've come to embrace, what it is I do now, where I'm just I can clean up stuff and kind of present it nice and write okay documentation, and that works so far.
Yeah. So the other half of the equation, besides the building of the actual products, is the marketing. How have you thought about marketing? Because I know it's not an easy task in general, and it's especially not easy for a lot of developers. I've been there in that phase that a lot of developers get stuck in, where it's just way easier to code than it is to figure out, okay, how am I going to get this into people's hands? And yet you've been working on Metafizzy for 7 years now. So you've kind of seen the entire marketing landscape change. I mean, there was no product hunt. A lot of the channels and a lot of the things that have been written about how to get the word out about your products just didn't exist 7 years ago. So How have you thought about, finding customers and making sure that people know about your products?
Yeah, I'll tell you, like marketing is definitely a sore spot for me because it's so hard to know when something is successful in that realm. And for something like the products that I make, it's not like I'm selling shoes where you see the shoes and you're like, I want those shoes, and you immediately buy it. I'm making a tool for developers. So other developers might be working on a site and they might come across the product because it gets retweeted for something like that. But they might not be working on the site that needs it at that time. So it's hard for me to track these things, and my sweet spot is working with code and doing design. So, I'm always reluctant to do marketing things because I don't see the immediate results. But I've been trying a bunch of different things, and it's really what are the things that appeal to me. And some of the basic stuff where it's like I never did an email campaign before I started working on Metafizzy full time. So that was like one of the first things I did. Was like, all right, I'm coming out with a new major version, and I'm going to be putting together an email list of all my previous customers. Like I hadn't thought of that at the time, or I just hadn't put the time into it.
How big is your mailing list, by the way?
It's over 10,000 previous customers right now.
Do you find that it really helps you and like getting the word out about new products, or what kind of emails do you send to your mailing list?
Well, this is one of these things where it's like there's part of me that wants to be a marketer and grow the business, and the other part of me wants to be like a human being and like not be. When I get emails, it's always like, it's, but every now and then there's a product or service I really love that I get the email and I appreciate. So hopefully I try to position Metafizzy like something like that, like people appreciate it. So something like Panic, who makes Mac apps, they have really great emails. So I've tried to copy off of their stuff. And is it successful? Yeah, it definitely brings in previous customers. It's so fulfilling to see when I send out one of those emails. There's a cohort that will immediately buy it, and it's just like, I mean, those are my people right there. Before doing the email, I didn't really know that existed.
Yeah, that's like your tribe, like the people who will follow you and buy anything that you make because they love what you do.
Yeah, but it's like, how do they get to that point? Do they even need to see this email, or are they already following me? There's all these questions out there.
Well, I responded to your email to ask you to come on the podcast because I think you launched the new version of Infinite Scroll, and I was like, holy shit, I should get Dave on the podcast. Metafizzy is so awesome, and I don't think I would have thought about it without the email. So there's there's one data point for you.
That's great to hear, and it's always like so murky what works and what, because like for all I know, my email's now going to spam. Like am I doing too much spammy things, and now I'm preventing from actually seeing people. But hey, I got this gig, so I'll take it.
What other marketing tactics have you tried over the years, and what are some things that have worked or that have not worked?
Last year I tried doing a series of kind of like video recording. I just did it over Twitter. So at the time you could only post 30 seconds to Twitter. So I was like, it was really short. It was like, I'm working on this feature. I closed out these issues and I made this much money this week. See you next week. Really fast. And the response to that was interesting because there was a lot of people like, hey, I don't know why, but I've listened to your video like once a week. It's like, even people like my brother-in-law, who doesn't, work in tech whatsoever. He's just like, it's just nice to see. And there was also something compelling about putting a human face to things, where it wasn't just like a website when you think of Metafizzy. It was actually Dave DeSandro behind it. But, did that get me any new customers? Maybe. I also tried some kind of, what I did is a campaign for CodePens, which is a site that you can make website demos on. So I got a bunch of demo people in that scene to make things with Isotope and Packery and my products, and hopefully get that community excited, or at least that community know about it, because then I'm leveraging those demo people. They have their own, followers around them, and hopefully they can spread out the word that I felt like that was a kind of interesting way to get different people to see it. And then another thing I did was try Twitter promoted tweets, which is, I'm like a big Twitter user, but I also feel it's you're kind of like blinded when you're like working in your own home. That's not a phrase, but like it's so close to me that's like all I can see sometimes. So and I've had like some good tweets that get lots of retweets and things like that. So that's kind of how I judge if it's done well. Because again, I don't know if people see that tweet and they eventually come back to actually buy something, but there was just like a more of a general awareness. So those are the things I've tried so far. And then the other thing was something completely new, which was last year I did this completely different project called Logo Pizza, where I was so tired of working on code that I was like, let me work on logos because, it's like that was way more enticing. It was like the new shiny thing for me to chase at the time. It was like no more code. And so I made these logos, and it was this kind of gimmicky site that had the price went up with each logo purchased. And that was like, when I came out, that got a lot of traction on Hacker News and, via tweets and stuff like that. And that was helped promote the brand and also brought in all these different logo clients.
So can you explain the gimmick you talked about with the pricing?
Yeah, so the way it worked, it was like there's 50 logos. The original price for any logo was like $100. And then as soon as one person purchases a logo, the price increases by $20. So like then it's like $120 for the next logo. Then it's $140. So the idea behind that is that like if you're going to sit on your butt, like the price is going to go up. In addition to like the logo that you want might not be available because once it's purchased, that person owns it. So it was this kind of gimmick in addition to just logos.
And what was the point of it? Was the gimmick to? Did you think it would make it more interesting to people or more likely to succeed in Hacker News, or was there another reason behind it?
I had this inkling that when like it was kind of like a non-conventional thing. I've seen good results from these kind of. And I don't even know how. I don't even know what I can put to, but I could just think like the things that like I share, the things that I see like on my Twitter feed. It's not just like company releases new product. It's like a special kind of one-time kind of thing, right? And so I guess that's what I was trying to go after. And also I got this idea from another kind of promotional website where it was like iwearyourshirt.com, where it's the same thing where it's like this guy who wore a t-shirt and he would take, pictures with it. And so it'd be posted on Instagram. And so you would pay this guy $20 for January 1st. Now on January 2nd, it was $40. And by the end of the year, he made, like 6 figures just on wearing t-shirts. Right. And it was one of these things like, I should have thought of that. So I just reused it, that exact concept. And I felt like it produced the same results. Like people are like, oh, like this is, like people bought these logos. I had some people, it was like, they just wanted the logo, they didn't even really have a project for it. They're just like, let me get it. It triggered some like short response in their head. So
well, it's like the price is going to go up, they got to buy now. Otherwise the logos are going to be hundreds of dollars.
Yeah. And also like logos are kind of like ever present, but they're kind of hard to find, if you have to work with a logo designer that costs more money. And if you go to like something that's like, logos for sale, I feel it's like you don't get as a good a product. So I was kind of somewhere in between there where it was like, you pay more money, but you might be feeling better about it because I don't know, it's like a nicely designed site or something like that. Like I had a particular skill set there that I could exploit.
So not only did you have like an interesting pricing model for Logo Pizza, where the price increases every time somebody buys a logo, but you've also got, all of your other projects have, I would say, pretty abnormal pricing models, at least compared to a lot of the other people that I've interviewed, where you're selling open source software. Anybody can just come through and basically download what you've made and never pay you a dime. But you've got a license that says, hey, if you're going to use this for commercial reasons, then you need to pay me $20 or $30 or however much your different libraries cost. How does that work exactly? And how do you ensure that people are paying who are supposed to be paying?
Oh boy, licensing it's another like sore spot for me because it's legal stuff. And it's like, who understands it? So when I first started out, it was just like, as you said, it was kind of like a stipulation where if you use this for commercial reasons, you need to pay for it. And then eventually that was problematic because there was some people that, actually knew legalese and said, like, you're not using the right license here. And so, I tried different things. And eventually where I ended up now is that the actual terms of the license is that the product is open source and it's also licensed under GPL. And one of the stipulations of GPL is that if you use this publicly, you have to in turn open source your project. So if you do not want to use this project or open source your project, you need to pay for this license, which will allow you to use the Metafizzy product under closed source. And the reason why I got there is because of things like WordPress, which needs, GPL is like a big thing in WordPress. And it was just kind of like, it's been working so far. And so I actually worked with a lawyer to develop that. But as you mentioned, it's front-end software. So all this stuff is readily available. And the things that I'm competing against are free. Like there's a part of me that's like, should I be making more money or is it miraculous that I'm making money at all? Because somebody can be like, I don't want to pay this. But I think the way I went about it was like, try to make it official, work with a lawyer. So at least if somebody does check it, it looks legit. And Metafizzy's whole business has been built around the appearance of being legit. I mean, it actually is legit, but it's like it feeds back on one another.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have the appearance. And I think Isotope was one of the very first purchases that I made when starting Indie Hackers. I was like, I'm going to have a grid. I've seen this cool animation effect somewhere. Let me just Google and try to find out where that came from. And it took me to Metafizzy, and I checked your licensing page, and I was like, I just bought it. It was like, it's super cheap too. How do you decide on pricing? Because I think that's a thing that a lot of people struggle with, where the common advice you hear from every angle is charge more. But psychologically, it's so easy to come up with reasons why you can't charge more, why you shouldn't charge more, especially when, like you said, all of your competitors are basically free.
Yeah, and this is another thing too, where it's like I have a personal feeling about how to do pricing because I'm a front-end developer and it comes from a community of free and open opportunity, and the stuff I'm competing against is also free. So the way the Metafizzy pricing works is that it's per developer and it's a one-time purchase, and it is tied to the major version. So if there's a big version upgrade, you'll need to make a new purchase. However, it's not annual reoccurrence. And the current pricing scheme is that it's $25 for a single individual, and it's like $110 for up to 8 people, and then it's $320 for everybody in your organization. And I haven't played around too much with that over the years. The way it's like worked out is that between those 3 tiers, I'm kind of making the same amount of money for an individual product amongst those 3. So I think like that seems like a good thing, that it's not like lopsided in any way like that. I'm sure I might be able to make more money if it was reoccurring, but there's a part of me that just hates that model. Like I hate paying for Photoshop month after month, and I kind of see the updates. It doesn't feel like I'm getting that much. And it's also there's just something weird about paying for open source software in general. So there's part of me that's like feels icky about it, even though it is like my income. I do it so I can feel good about it too. That's kind of the pricing model. It hasn't been A/B tested.
Your entire situation is pretty cool because you're basically just doing whatever it is that you want. Like you're working on projects that are fun for you to work on, and when they stop being fun, you just work on a different thing, like Logo Pizza, and you're charging the amount of money that feels right for you, and it's all working out to the point where like you can still sustain basically a developer salary on your own, which is like pretty much living the dream, Dave. How's your life changed since you quit Twitter and started working on Metafizzy on your own? I mean, have you found that it's lived up to your expectations of what it's like to be kind of like the solo bootstrapper, or have you found that you have a lot more free time? What is the upside of this new lifestyle?
I mean, at the time it was just so liberating. I was working at Twitter, and being a part of the big company it's hard to see the fruits of your labor manifested with the company at large, because it has to go through multiple rounds of revisions and it has to work with the larger experience. And I was really feeling pressed down against that pressure at the time I left Twitter. And so the first couple months working for Metafizzy full-time, it felt just so enthralling to work on something that I knew was going to see the light of day, that was all my work. And even if it was successful or not, like I could feel that I did something with that. And so that was just amazing. And that's one of like the highlights of my career at that time. Just the fact that I didn't have to deal with meetings was like, oh my gosh, it was like, I'm going to go see a movie, or I'm going to go play at the arcade for like a day, because you know what? If I was at another company, this time would be stuck in meetings or responding to emails.
Yeah, it would just be wasted. And I feel the same way. I think like just the freedom and like the self-determination that comes with being self-employed and being able to work whenever you want, take care of chores whenever you want, just take a day off or a week off whenever you want is awesome. Do you still feel kind of the same way that you did right after you quit?
I mean, that initial high has kind of smoothed out a little bit. But recently, the big thing was that, my son was born 6 months ago. And so I was able to, set my own hours and say, I'm going to be taking paternity leave and focusing on my wife and my son for 4 months. It ended up being, I didn't really have a hard deadline there, but I was able to do that. And that's a whole big life experience that I'm very thankful to have. And that was able to be, that occurred because of Metafizzy and working for myself. And there's other things that, like moving out of New York and buying a house. It's like, how do people do this when they work full time? It's like, how do they even like sign all the papers and stuff like that? I was working for myself. I could scan in stuff. It's just like so much paperwork.
People just don't read stuff. They just sign it.
Well, even just like if you just need to scan something, it's like, oh my gosh, you got to print it out, scan it. It takes a lot of time. So I absolutely appreciate it. And I feel like so lucky to be able to do these things. But at the same time, it does come with its own responsibilities. Right now, Metafizzy, it's having a down year. That might be because I took paternity leave, or might just because, other market forces or something like that. And so now there's this question hanging over me, like, what do we do to get it back to where it was a year or two ago? Or how does Metafizzy change? Or is it still going to be a full-time thing come a year later? So it does come at its own cost.
Yeah, it was actually a perfect segue, because I wanted to end by talking about kind of how things have changed and dealing with competition and really like your long-term outlook. Because, obviously one of the upsides to having a job, you can be fired at any time, but like there is such a thing as, job security, and you can be reasonably certain that if you have a job, you will probably be employed, indefinitely into the future. Whereas when you branch out on your own, nothing's guaranteed, right? Your business can decline, your marketing efforts can fail, your new products might not take off, etc. So how do you think about the future, and what are your plans to, I guess, keep up this lifestyle and keep Metafizzy successful?
Plans for the future. Well, each year it's been get to the end of the year. Now that I've been doing it full time for 2.5 years, I'm able to see like what have I been able to do with that time. So things like Logo Pizza were a big time investment, but I felt like it paid off. So for me right now, like the biggest thing was getting a new product out the door, which was Infinite Scroll, which brought us to this conversation. Now it's like, can I build the business? And then also there's these like kind of bigger goals, which would be like, can I hire somebody else? Can I grow the business to that much? Because I think what Metafizzy is doing is that, bringing money into a front-end developer just on my front-end code is very special, and I wish more developers would do it. So, it's kind of like a lofty, touchy-feely kind of goal, but it would be great to distribute this business model kind of like in the open source spirit and have other people do this sort of thing. And I have seen some other people try it like that, but to the point where Metafizzy, it's still just me, which is, one of the things I've always kind of felt reluctant about, where it's like I haven't been able to grow it past me. I'd love to be able to hire somebody else. So it's 1 year at a time. And right now I'm just thinking about getting that sales back up, to be honest.
Yeah, a friend of mine was talking to me, and he said that he really wanted to start something, but he felt like he was kind of late to the party. Like he wished he had started an online business or a side project 5 years ago, but he dragged his feet. And now he feels like it's too late because it seems like everybody's doing it, and there's so much written about it. And I personally think that it's not true, and it's still early days, and that 10 years from now there'll be a lot more people doing what you're doing and what a lot of other people are doing than there are now. But what would you say to someone in that position who's considering starting a side project or who's considering starting an online business but is kind of on the fence about it?
I'd say the first thing to do is start. Just do it like any other thing. Make a demo and do it for you and see where things goes. It's like in my experience, as you get better by doing something over and over, but you also see how you personally respond to it. And so this is, whenever I've ever tried some new stuff where it's like freelancing or working for like different clients or things like that, like that was kind of new for me a couple years ago, but I at least tried it. And I also didn't feel that it had to be the next big thing. So start and also keep it small. It's okay if things don't work out because not everything I did worked out.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Dave. I think I've had a really good time talking to you.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me share my story.
Where can people go online to find out more about you and about Metafizzy?
My sites are DeSandro.com, DeSandro, and Metafizzy.co, Metafizzy.
And what's your Twitter? I'm going to go follow you right now.
My Twitter handle is DeSandro, and Metafizzy's handle is Metafizzy Co.
All right. Take it easy, Dave.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed listening to this conversation and you're looking for a way to help support the Indie Hackers podcast, then you should subscribe on iTunes and leave a quick rating and a review. It only takes about 30 seconds, but it actually really helps get the word out, and I would personally appreciate it very much. In addition, if you are running an internet business or if it's something that you'd like to do in the future, you should join me and a whole bunch of other internet entrepreneurs on the indiehackers.com forum. It's basically a community of like-minded individuals just giving each other feedback and helping out with ideas and landing pages and marketing and growth and other internet business-related topics. That's www.indiehackers.com/forum. Hope to see you guys there.